Hello friends, and welcome back to ShieldScuff. Have you ever wondered what Jedi Fallen Order hides off camera from the player? In this video, we'll be covering 3 areas that Cal traverses while meeting friends and foes. During this time, we'll be showing off some out-of-bounds things, and how the game works from a perspective you're not supposed to see. Sometimes with some pretty humorous results, like the second sister falling off the map. So, buckle in as we make the jump to hyperspace, and I hope you enjoy. Jedi Fallen Order takes place 5 years after Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and follows a Padawan survivor of the Great Jedi Purge, Cal Kestis. The young man fled to the planet Bracca, a junkyard world in the Mid-Rim, and positioned himself under the cover of being a scrapper for the Scrapper Guild. What better place to hide from the Empire than within an organization that frequently works with them? Bracca is a wasteland, littered with decommissioned starships, crisscrossed with rail systems with which the scrap parts are transported. Both of these are things we see fairly early in the game, with the first being the decommissioned vessels. Once Cal takes his earphones off to hear what his boss has to say, we can move the camera out to take in the scenery, which is vast. Out here, we can see plenty of Republic Star Destroyers waiting to be broken down and sold to the Empire, parts that would likely be reutilized in Imperial Star Destroyers. Larger still, we see a Lucrehulk class vessel brought down to the surface to be dismantled. We could take a long ride out to peek at it, and if we do, we'll find it to be a rather low resolution model. That makes sense though, since from the player's normal perspective, this huge ship is likely miles away. One other point of interest is what lays below all of these structures on the surface. A creature which at a glance could easily be mistaken as a Sarlacc due to the telltale pit, but it's actually a much larger superorganism called the Iblis Maw. Either way, Cal should avoid it like the plague. Heading back towards the discarded spaceships, as Cal advances across the scrapyard via narrow passages and climbs that would easily dial someone's fear of heights up to 11, he comes across a Star Destroyer being dismantled by a giant cutting laser which, frankly, looks like an oversized lightsaber from a distance. If we move the camera out to take a look at what's going on, we can see that this particular ship is fairly well detailed since its proximity to the player is closer. Also interesting is the fact that only the portions facing the player are molten and glowing after the laser finishes detaching the wing from the rest of the ship. If we take a look at the wing itself, it would appear to be completely cool to the touch, though I wouldn't test that. This is just one of those times where we as the player wouldn't normally be able to see something. In this case, the ship from a different vantage point. As Cal advances further through the scrapyards to catch up with his friend Prof, we see the Star Destroyer's wing once more as it's being hauled away. If we're quick, we can move the camera to give chase. However, ultimately the wing and the machinery carrying it just disappear when they get to a point that would normally be out of the player's sight. Moving on, Cal finally catches up to Prof, only for them to stumble across his old, discarded Jedi starfighter. Cal, understandably, gets nervous here. Perhaps this buried distraction is why neither of them realized the portion of the ship they were on was currently being sheared off by a cutting laser. The metal beneath their feet breaks away before either of them can do anything, and after a long descent, Cal has no choice but to use the Force to save Prof from the Iblis Maw below. This brings us to the next scenes we'll be breaking the camera for, the transport vessel environment as well as the vision Cal receives through the Force. Jedi Fallen Order is a more instanced game than, say, an open-world game like Horizon Zero Dawn. That is to say, it takes place in multiple separate locations as opposed to being mostly contained in one open world. This transport sequence is a good example of that, as if we move the camera outside of the train car we see, well, not a lot. The transport is contained within a black rectangular box to isolate the scene from the outside lighting of Bracca's skybox. The interesting thing here is that the Imperial corridor from Cal's vision is right next door, and we can take a look inside to find it's basically empty aside from a lone astromech droid. The sequence of Cal's vision plays out between both locations, with him coming to the end of the transport at a different looking door, only to turn around and find himself inside of the Imperial corridor. It's really a pretty neat setup. After Cal wakes from his vision, he and Prof disembark from the vessel. It is here that we have the arrival of the Inquisitors. These interrogators, partially trained in the dark side of the Force, are here to try and suss out the Force user that they suspect to be trying to blend in with the crowd. Prof makes a stand here, speaking out against the Empire, and he pays the ultimate price for it. Or does he? If we view his unfortunate demise from a different angle, we can see that the devs had his character model remain present after his deadly encounter with the second sister's blade, and he's even standing back up as if nothing happened. And here I thought only Plagueis had mastered that ability. With no time to grieve his friend, Cal tries to make an escape onto a cargo train. Despite having years of rust to shake off, the Imperial stormtroopers are still no match for Cal. Maybe the Empire should have reconsidered before decommissioning the clone troopers. But I digress. The environment for this train ride is quite different from the previous transport ride, as we'll have portions taking place on top of the train as opposed to strictly being inside. If we zoom out, we can get an idea of how this was done, with the train extending quite far in front and behind of Cal's current position, running continuously through a repeating environment. Honestly, it's quite clever. Unlike us though, Cal won't have any time to take in the scenery as he is eventually pinned down by an LAAT gunship. This craft spawns in a blur off to the side of the train before lighting up the deck where Cal is trying to take cover. Once Cal makes it to the next train car, this Imperial Patrol transport darts back to the second set of rails running parallel to the train and freezes in wait of its next appearance. It's almost like it's hitching a ride on the rails itself. An additional funny thing to note about this ship is that after its next attack run, it zooms over Cal's head towards the back of the train. If we take a look at this portion from a different angle though, we see that the ship despawns and leaves its searchlight floating in the air above a train car. This is a recurring theme on this train, as we can see that the portions of the train that have been destroyed throughout this encounter have also left some things behind that are still keeping pace with the train, not the least of which are the train cars themselves, which are being dragged through the terrain far beneath the tracks. If we take a look further back, we can see that a lot of the parts that are interactable, like climbing areas for instance, are still floating behind the train a ways back. Pretty weird that those wouldn't just stay attached or vanish altogether, but I guess we wouldn't normally have a sightline on it either way. After Cal's exhausting attempt at an escape, the second sister eventually catches up with him. Despite a rescue effort made by the Mantis and her crew, Cal is forced into a head-on confrontation with the Inquisitor, and honestly, for an out-of-practice Padawan, I'd say he doesn't do a terrible job simply surviving. The Mantis intervened once more with some heavy blaster fire, giving Cal the opening he needed to run. The second sister is nothing if not determined, however, and leaps at Cal one last time as he tries to board the Mantis. This whole interaction is great when viewed from a different angle, as the second sister simply falls off into the inky abyss below as the ship flies off. In the actual scene, she isn't quite shaken here, and ends up on the Mantis's windshield. Honestly, just pondering if she actually fell off that way and still ended up getting back onto the ship is funny to think about. Truly, the dark side is a pathway to some unnatural abilities. Thanks, Palps. As we bring Jedi Fallen Order's first chapter in for a landing, we'll take a look at the Mantis doing the opposite, making the jump to hyperspace. This effect is achieved in much the same way as the transport level. The Mantis is still within Bracca's skybox, but thrown into a cylinder making up the hyperspace travel effects that we see from within the ship. Simple, but effective for the shot. And that wraps up our first look at Jedi Fallen Order from behind the scenes. I hope you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you did, and we'll see you real soon on ShieldScuff.